You may know the name of Brian Eno from his rock star days with the celebrated Roxy Music. You may know Brian Eno from his numerous albums of ambient music, including the pioneering Music for Airports, a breakthrough making conceptual music accessible to a wide public. You may even know Brian Eno from his art videotapes such as Mistaken Memories of Medieval Manhattan and Thursday Afternoon. Or you may have seen Brian Eno receive a Grammy Award in 1988 as producer of the best-selling album The Joshua Tree by U2. You may remember films in which his music has been used, such as Dune, 9½, Castaway, and Wall Street. Or you may have seen his exquisite sound and video installations in darkened art galleries from Venice, Italy to San Francisco, California. But above all, Brian Eno is famous for his use of synthesized sound, which helped open the landscape of rock music to the imagination. Though he admits to being a composer, arranger, songwriter, singer, record producer, artist, and video and filmmaker, Brian Eno appropriately and simply describes himself as a synthesist.
The wind, isn't that nice? So often in this room that the wind or the birds or the rain just fit right into the music, and I have to get a mic up there and record them, because I realised that part of the way I've been thinking about the music has involved whatever was going on outside the window. What you need are fewer possibilities that are more interesting. You know, the whole emphasis of synthesizer design has been towards giving you more and more options. It's not more options that you want, it's more useful options. You know, so I've always been trying to press for a synthesizer that's like this. You know, this guitar here, look, has 3 positions. In fact, there are 5 because you can get in between the positions. It's a copy of a Fender. It's a very good Japanese copy. But the thing about it is that each of those options means something. It really is a different sound, and it's a useful sound. This thing, which I like very much also, has infinite options, and you just don't need so many, you know. For playing, it would be just as good to have a synthesizer that had 6 or 12 really fantastically good, useful sounds. I thought I wanted to make a kind of music that had the long now and the big here in it. And for me, that meant this idea of expanding the music out to the horizons. In terms of space, you were not aware of the edges of the music. I thought I wanted to make music where you just wouldn't know what was music and what wasn't, where it was a plateau. And everything you could hear could be music, even things that weren't on the record, you know. Like if there were sounds going on while you were listening, that could be part of it too. So a music that included rather than excluded, that didn't have a beginning and an end. This is the sense of making the now longer. was saying I want to take music away from being abstract collections of sounds, and I want to make it like places that you've been to. I want to make it sound like a place that you've experienced before. And I used to call them, at that time, imaginary landscapes. At the moment, I feel I'm carrying out my motto, which is go to an extreme and then retreat to a more useful position. Because a lot of the emphasis of what's called artistic behavior is to go to an extreme, right? To find an extreme position and to defend it and occupy it. But I think, well, those aren't necessarily the most interesting places to be. It's interesting that somebody's been there, and you want to know about what they saw there, and you want to be able to find out about it. But you might not want to be there yourself. It's a bit like living at the North Pole, you know. To know that the North Pole exists is useful and enriching, but personally, I prefer to be here or in the south of France. And it's a bit like that with music, that I want to know about all those boundary conditions. And they exert a kind of influence on what you do, because they allow certain things to be possible. Like they allow it to be possible to have such long spaces in a piece of music like this. Joshua trees, you know, those are the oldest trees. In fact, they're the oldest living organisms on the planet. Some of them are several thousand years old. I've never really made music from, or that interested me from, a purely intuitive position. It's always been connected into some sort of big theoretical position that I felt was important at the time. And as far as I'm concerned, the music doesn't have to exhibit any of that. It doesn't have to show it. Like when you're listening to it, you don't have to be aware of that. But the important thing about theoretical positions is that they lead you to decisions that you wouldn't have taken otherwise, or you wouldn't have permitted. Good taste would have militated against them, you know. I look at the variety of the world and of the organisms and so on within it, and instead of saying, well, each one of these is an entirely separate phenomenon, I say each one of these is the product of quite a small number of forces and constraints, reconfiguring in different ways. So that basic thought about how the universe is made can run through into how I decide to work on music. I have to have something that I feel confident about at the deepest levels that I can think about. Oh dear, did you hear that awful story about a man in Yellowstone Park who wanted to take a picture of his wife with a grizzly bear, and he tried to encourage the grizzly bear into the car because it killed his wife, and he's now suing Yellowstone Park. Isn't that too much? I want to be on this edge between improvisation and collaboration. As soon as you hear two instruments play a melody together, you know there's a conspiracy. You know that those two people have agreed with each other, have talked about it, have predetermined something. But sometimes the nature of the melody is such that you feel that it wasn't a scored melody. It couldn't have been a scored melody. It's a trick I've used once or twice where, I can't explain this, it's too technical. Well, it would be a bit like if you saw a Jackson Pollock painting, and then next to it you saw another one identical. That would be very shocking, wouldn't it, to see another identical version of it? Because you'd realize that whereas this first one was done like that, the second one would have had to be done with a one-hair brush. So there's a dichotomy between the freedom of this thing, which is apparent in the look of it, and the meticulousness of the perfect copy of it. It would be very hard to make a perfect copy of a Jackson Pollock. But if you saw either one of them on its own, you would only see the freedom of it. It's seeing the two together that tells you that there's also a conspiracy. That's the only word I can use. And I like there to be a sense of conspiracy in the things I'm doing. I don't know why that idea appeals to me so much. The shock of seeing the perfect copy, and you know, to do that is easy. To do the copy of it is it calls into play all sorts of different skills and talents, and it sort of tells you about another world that exists, a world of carefulness and meticulous and deceit as well. I like the deceit being involved in it. I want to make both the original and the simulant. This music for films is actually a collection of music by different people, including me. It's music for hypothetical films. It's not music that has been used in films. It's music that sounds like film music, you know. film music has a very interesting identity which makes it compositionally different from other music, which is that the main part of it is missing. You know, film music is there to support an action, but the action is missing when you just hear it on a record, and I think that's very interesting, to make music that is just context without action. And I've always enjoyed records of film music for that, because they leave, if you don't know the film, they leave you free to construct it. You know, you construct your own picture that goes with that. If you send that sound to the big room, let's say, okay, that's sort of to a big cavern of some kind. Now, if I make the cavern liquid but not the main sound, so what I'm doing now is making that liquid effect on the echo rather than on the original sound. All right, now here's another variation. Suppose I want that sound to shine in a special way. And you can get lost in this kind of thing. You can waste a lot of time. A voice in a piece of music always becomes the focal point. So I left me out. I didn't want a personality in there, really. If I left me out, it invited the listener in. I love singing. It's a shame. I would still like to use my voice, but I can't find a way to do it.
And it will shudder as I guide it with my rudder on its metal way. It will come the night before it as it leaves the day that saw it on its metal way. Nobody passes us in the deep quiet of the dark sky. Nobody sees us alone out here.
If I'm not in there taking them through, then it's an empty space for them. They can move into it, and they can go through in their own way. I mean, this is one of the problems that I think My Life in the Bush of Ghosts sort of addressed this in a way by using voices that were, whose personality you didn't know. They were just found voices. They were just sounds that happened to be drifting through the atmosphere at the time. Different cultures seem to regard dilettantes like me in different ways. The English hate it. They've always hated people who did more than one thing, I think. And they've always hated people who rose above their station. Well, I definitely rose above my station because I didn't have credentials to do anything, actually. In the first place, I didn't have the credentials to be a musician. And when they finally accepted me for that, I then went and started being an artist, which was really going too far, I think. Now, in other countries, it's different. They are interested in the fact that somebody does more than one thing. They find that that's interesting, that somebody could be working in the visual arts and sound at the same time. And they understand that those two things might inform one another and could be used together. Sometimes when you arrive new in a place, you can really see it. I remember the first day I arrived in New York. Not the very first time I arrived, but the first time I saw New York. On that day, I saw it as a great sort of city of hope and a kind of optimistic chaos, you know. And in fact, it was that way of looking at it that became Mistaken Memories. I had a place on the 13th floor, and looking out of my window, I would just see the tops of all the buildings, all those beautiful castle tops. And I thought, I'm sure the people building this were also feeling that they were making a big impression in this brand new culture. I more and more feel America as being a thrilling, vibrant, medieval culture. Medieval, for me, means somewhere where things are being worked out, where cultures have crossed and are crashing together, and hybrids are constantly being thrown up. Europeans are so ready to shoot it down, you know, because it's so easy to see all the bad sides of America. You know, the world awash with Coca-Cola in Dallas. I felt people's concept of what's real is almost always that which is most convenient for them to believe at the time. And the convenient picture of New York at that time was of a street city, a city where you kept your vision down. What I did on that spring day and what I did in Mistaken Memories was I looked up and I saw this beautiful city against a huge sky. That's a different picture altogether. As soon as you let the sky into the picture, the city is not so overwhelming, you know. There's space in there as well.
Now he is the most recognized as a versatile actor
I like are also somewhere in the spaces between the categories. The painters I like, and so on. So, and of course, as a result, they're generally not very successful. But I am quite successful, and I'm pleased at being successful, being in this space between things, being successful without having to subscribe to a particular category and swear allegiance to it, you know. Look, there's a little fish down there. Art audiences are cynical. They have to be. It's part of the game of being an art audience that you're supposed to be knowing, and you're supposed to really like this and really despise this and take these strong opinions about things. And I must say, I hate them as an audience. I think they're terrible. As regards visual art, I don't know what I would even be able to say I was. I don't know if I'm part of, you know, anything like a painting tradition or anything like that. I feel just as much part of the circus tradition or the fairground tradition or something like that, a haunted house or... When I first started doing video work, it was pointless commercially or in any sense. It was something I just was interested in and decided to pursue. It started to grow and take on an identity, and now it's reached the point where I want to really put some attention into it, some serious attention, as I did do it at a certain time with music. First of all, I was always interested in light, from a very long time ago. It's an approach to using technology that I think is interesting, where instead of using all these machines to reproduce something again and again perfectly, you use them to make something different again and again. So you use them as ways of generating variety rather than fixing something in place. Those crystals in there are really the first things I ever did. Probably the single painting experience that affected me most was the first time I ever saw a Mondrian. And it was to do with the economy of means and the fantastic impact that that produced. I like systems that make use of the brain, the watcher's brain, as part of the process. The notion of art not being a quality in things, but the name of a type of interaction between you and something, or you and an event. If you start thinking of it as an interaction, it frees you from a lot of aesthetic problems. You don't have to decide whether something is or isn't art. All you have to know is whether it does that for some people. And it might do it like a hit single will do it for 2.5 million people for a month. A cathedral might do it for several hundred million people for 700 years. think installations really is the way I want to go. I started doing very loud, fast music and went to slower and slower music. I started doing very slow videos, but now I'm starting to see that I want to do things that are more ragged and have a coarser texture, and are faster as well. Coming back to Woodbridge was sort of the opposite of being in New York. That was part of the feeling. That most rootless city, you know, a city where you feel everybody is just staying until they can make enough money to go somewhere else. So coming back to here was partly reminding myself that there were other ways of living, that you could have a different feeling about where you lived. For me, the river was always a way of going somewhere. I spent a lot of time, every child here, I think, in this town spends a lot of time around the river because of all the mysterious things that live down the river that don't live elsewhere, and because you can go swimming there and catching eels and, you know, all those things. And water in general there's an idea about water that I like, which is that it's constant but not solid. So the river is always going somewhere. I mean, a lot of the songs I wrote are about being on rivers or water in some way. I like all of the images to do with water, like being in a boat, this protected shell that you make for yourself, which allows you to sit in this wonderful material, water, and it allows you to flow with it or to move against it. I like any place that is penetrated by water, and Venice, of course, is the great example of a city that is completely penetrated by water. I think anybody who seriously believes in an afterlife is likely to be slightly mad in this life.